Welcome back to the Real Texas Radio Podcast. I am your host, Bronin. Thank you for tuning in once again, or if you're joining the show for the first time, 1,000 welcomes. Big show today. I'm going to be talking about an ex-Dallas city councilor who it turns out may not have even been living, forget about in his district, in the same county where he was elected to represent. He is now running for a better paid position, flying under the radar and heading into a runoff. So that's going to be the marquee story of today. I also want to talk about the villain who broke into the Dallas Museum of Art. His fate has been decided, and I don't think you're going to like the outcome. I've got a few other items as well I want to discuss, but before we get into it, please make sure, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe, follow the Real Texas Radio Podcast from wherever you stream. Tell a friend, especially if they're in Texas, to check out the Real Texas Radio Podcast. Send them a link and follow the show on X at RTR_Bronin, RTR_Bronin. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, now, you're listening to the Real Texas Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Bronin. Just a fed-up taxpayer, bringing you all of your Texas, local, and national news. Okay, we have to start out with Omar Narvaez. He is currently seeking election to the office of Justice of the Peace here in Dallas County. And he's in a runoff. There were multiple candidates who were running in the primary in March 3rd here in Dallas. But now Omar Narvaez, he's a former Dallas city councilor. He is in the runoff, and he is challenging another candidate, Caitlin Logie, I believe is how you pronounce her name. And, well, there's a key difference between Caitlin Logie and Omar Narvaez. One of them is an attorney, and the other one is not an attorney. Now, if you are wondering, what is a justice of the peace? I thought it was one of those civilian officiants who can marry couples in civil services, who can preside over the ceremony of a civil marriage. Do one of those 5-minute quickie ceremonies for people who don't want to get married inside the church. That's what I always thought a justice of the peace was up until a few years ago. But a justice of the peace here in Texas, essentially they're a judge over small claims court for matters that are up to $20,000 in civil damages. They can preside over jury trials. They preside, a lot of what they do is eviction court, tenants' rights kind of matters. Oh, and of course, the salary, it's about $150,000 per year. So it has that perk, especially if you're somebody who is not an attorney like Omar Narvaez. And as far as I know, doesn't have any formal legal education or training. Now, historically, we've had many great jurists who they didn't go to law school, right? It was even who were practicing law before the modern day equivalent of law school and the bar and all that existed. Abraham Lincoln comes to top of mind, who didn't spend any time in the classroom. He was a lawyer and a judge. And we have had Supreme Court justices who never attended law school. I believe most recently, FDR appointed the last Supreme Court justice who did not go to law school, who was a very qualified individual, I might add. However, that is not the case here, not with Omar Narvaez. Omar Narvaez, he is a highly unqualified individual to serve as Justice of the Peace here in Dallas. And, well, how do we know this? Well, Dallas and Fuego, he actually was able to dig up a lawsuit that Omar Narvaez filed in Dallas County. And this is a lawsuit. The facts of the situation are a car accident that Omar Narvaez, the plaintiff, alleges he did not cause, and that he suffered damages as a result of another driver. So these are the facts of the case. I'm not going to name the defendant, although interestingly, I did a little bit of research and I found a person with the same name as the defendant named in this lawsuit who is a public school teacher here in Dallas. I won't reveal any more information than that, but I find that, Mr. Justice, Equity, DEI, Omar Narvaez is suing, if this is the same person, a Dallas ISD teacher. Okay. So here are the facts. Plaintiff would respectfully show the court that on or about February 9th, 2023, he was traveling northbound on North Beckley Avenue in Dallas, Texas, when his car was suddenly and without warning struck by the defendant driving a vehicle. I won't even say the name of the vehicle. Defendant disregarded a red light striking plaintiff. Defendant's negligence proximately caused plaintiff's injuries and damages described herein. And Omar Narvaez, he is seeking relief of more than $250,000, but not more than $1 million. Now, this is a very interesting lawsuit for a number of reasons. And the most glaring issue with the lawsuit is where Omar Narvaez lists his domicile, where he lives, his residence. Aubrey, Texas. Aubrey, Texas. Do you know where Aubrey, Texas is? It's in Denton County, which do I need to tell you is not the council district that Omar Narvaez represented or misrepresented for 8 years. District 6 counselor here in Dallas for 8 years. He is suing somebody and claiming that his domicile is in Aubrey, Texas, in Denton County. So that's the first problem, because you're supposed to live in the district that you represent. Now, I know we have a lot of politicians historically and very recently who they have a lot of questions about their address, like Eric Swalwell recently disgraced and resigned from Congress and withdrew from the governor of California race. There were questions about him actually living in California. Same thing with Adam Schiff, the senator from California. Same thing with Ed Markey, the fossil, the junior U.S. senator from Massachusetts, who he's basically lived in Washington, D.C. for the last 50 years. All kinds of rumors about his actual house. I think he owns a house in Massachusetts, but, rumor has it, at least at some point, the water was shut off in the house because he was never there. And if he landed at Logan Airport in Boston, he'd probably need a map to get to his house in Malden, just a short ride from Logan Airport. Hillary Clinton, she domiciled in New York State when she wanted to run for the U.S. Senate after Bill Clinton's term ended in 2000. Same thing with Bobby Kennedy Sr. He's not a New York guy, but established a residence in New York State in the 60s so that way he could run successfully for the U.S. Senate out of New York State. So this kind of thing happens all the time. But with the city council, this is a clear violation that while on the city council, it looks like Omar Narvaez was not living in his district. Now, this was something else very interesting. In Texas, the statute of limitations for filing a lawsuit is 2 years. And this incident, according to the lawsuit, this car accident, was February 9th, 2023. You know when the lawsuit was filed? You know, Guess what date this lawsuit was filed? February 10th, 2025 at 5:10 p.m. That's what it says on the lawsuit. That is more than 2 years. That is outside of the statute of limitations. And I have a theory as to why this lawsuit was filed just outside of the statute of limitations by Omar Narvaez, which I'm going to get into in a moment. I've also got some sound cuts that I want to play here, but something you can be thinking about. Do you think that somebody who is essentially going to be a judge, a justice of the peace, if he wins the race, which he very well may based on name recognition, this race is about 3 weeks away, the runoff. Do you think that it might be important for somebody who's basically going to be serving as a judge in a civil court, in a JP court, to know the statute of limitations on a lawsuit? Do you think that might be important? That might be relevant to your qualifications or lack thereof? Here's Omar Narvaez. This is him at the Dallas City Council during a council briefing, March 26th of 2025, a little bit over a month after he filed a lawsuit claiming that he lives in Denton County.
Is a much, much different place to live. Not everybody wants to live far away from downtown. I don't want to live in far north Dallas.
Well, then why do you? Why do you live in Aubrey when you're supposed to be Dallas City Councilor representing District 6? You're living up in Denton County. Go figure.
I've done that before. I didn't like it. I like where I live. I live just on the other side of the bridge.
Apparently not.
It's about what you just said for one bedroom. That's about what I have to pay every month.
So you just lied in a lawsuit? Or your attorney representing you just lied and said that you live in Aubrey in Denton County? And now here a month later, you claim you're complaining about the rent that you have to pay here in Dallas.
And in order to have those folks so they can live there, so they can work, they can be close to where they are, because nobody wants to drive an hour and a half to get here, or it's too far.
Is that how long it takes you to get from Aubrey, or is that how long it took you to get from Aubrey to Dallas City Hall? About 90 minutes in traffic. I can tell you I certainly wouldn't like that commute either. But it's just ridiculous. And this is getting like no attention. Thank you, Dallas and Fuego, for bringing this lawsuit to light, posting it on Twitter. But this is just really flagrant audacity on behalf of Omar Narvaez, who, by the way, he also was complaining about his council salary of $60,000 per year. Let me go ahead and play that cut.
Because 60 is now poverty for a family of 3. $80,000 for a family of like 4, I think, is poverty now in the city of Dallas. So I get the fiscal hawkness that continues to happen every week, and I don't have a problem with that. But it's like, let's be real here. If you don't want people to have the ability to afford an apartment, then just say it. And don't use all this other stuff, because every single week
that's enough. That's enough. You know what? If you can't afford a 1-bedroom on your own, then you need a roommate. Maybe you need 2 roommates. I'm so sick of hearing that. You can afford an apartment in Dallas on $60,000 and in District 6. Yes, you can. And you know what else? It just drives me insane when any politician complains about the salary. Then why don't you go out and get a real job? Why don't you do something else? Oh, at Omar Narvaez. Oh, well, he's found himself, or he thinks he's landed himself, this justice of the peace position. That'll come with a nice raise, over $150,000. What has he been doing since being term limited out of the Dallas City Council? So that was almost a year ago now. He's been doing nothing, bumming around, hoping to get this job, $150,000. And what about all the free vacations that they get? Oh, excuse me. Oh, economic development, trade missions. developing relationships with our sister cities around the world. Like Adam Basildua going to Japan twice on the taxpayer dime. Jesse Moreno was just in Taiwan. The mayor, I think maybe he chipped in partially for the trips, but he was doing a luxury safari in Africa. He went to Dijon, France, a sister city. Going to New York on trade missions. Who do you think is paying for that? You think that's coming out of his salary or any of their salary? No, it's not. They get free vacations, free travel, free food stipends when they're on vacation, courtesy of you. So boo hoo hoo, your $60,000 salary, plus another $40,000 a year for vacation, which they always make sure to take in the summer, by the way, when it's nice weather. They never want to go on vacation in January or February when the flights are much cheaper and the hotels are much cheaper. No, they always wait to do the economic development in the height of summer, the height of travel season, again, on your dime. So, I don't want to hear it. So this is my theory. Why would Omar Narvaez have filed suit 2 years after the car accident? I know you have 2 years on the lawsuit. But, if you were really injured, if you were really suffering, if you were really aggrieved, would you wait 2 years to file the lawsuit? I don't think so. So this is my theory. Back in 2024 in November, there were a number of propositions that Dallas voters got to weigh in on. And by and large, the Dallas voters, very uncharacteristically, I hope that it was the beginning of a trend and not just a fluke, but there were a lot of very positive outcomes in the 2024 election, the presidential election notwithstanding. And what was one of the ballot questions? Should the Dallas City Council and the mayor get a raise to, I think, $80,000 and $120,000 respectively? And no, they should not get a raise. That's what the voters decided. No raise for the Dallas City Council or the mayor. They don't deserve it. So that was a very good outcome. It was another outcome, which term limits, they're tough. It's definitely an argument. I understand that it means that sometimes you have to sacrifice a good candidate or a solid occupant of the office. That does happen sometimes. But it's also really nice when you are just able to term limit out the garbage. And now the Dallas City Council has a term limit, 8 years. And there were 3 candidates who were affected by that in 2024, including Omar Narvaez and including Carolyn King Arnold. Now, Carolyn King Arnold, she tried to fight and she tried to get back on the ballot and claim that the will of the voters didn't apply to her because she was already in the office, and that she was trying to argue, I believe, that this term limit new law was only going to apply to new candidates. That was, again, another non-attorney, as you might be able to guess. And, now I'm wondering if Omar Narvaez, if he was watching that and seeing how Carolyn King Arnold's fate was going to fare, and see if she was going to be able to make that argument work and be able to stay on the ballot and potentially keep her seat for a 5th term. And this all happened, I think she first got struck down by the city secretary's office the end of January 2025, and she still tried to press forward. And it didn't work out for her. And then, so Carolyn King Arnold gets smacked down the end of January, last week of January. And then February 10th, Omar Narvaez is filing this lawsuit for a car accident that happened 2 years prior, more than 2 years prior, outside of the statute of limitations. Do you think that Omar Narvaez's plan was, well, now I can't run for the city council again, and it only pays $60,000 a year. I'm living in Aubrey, 90 minutes away. Now I need to find my next grift. So this grift, this lawsuit is going to tide me over until I can worm my way into a justice of the peace position, fly under the radar because nobody's really paying attention to this race. And do you think that's what might have been on his mind? That this was going to be his meal ticket, this lawsuit, to tide him over until he could get a nice, cushy justice of the peace salary? That's kind of what I'm thinking. But we'll see. This Caitlin Logie, I'm not impressed with her. She sent me a mailer. And the mailer I got, I think over a month ago now, I tweeted it out. RTR_Bronin. RTR_Bronin, by the way. I also tweeted out the video, if you want to see the video accompanying the audio, of Omar Narvaez complaining about not wanting to live north of Dallas. So if you want to see that, check that out. I tweeted out the mailer a while back. Caitlin Logie, she's only been in Dallas proper for about a year. And I was trying to find her address as well. I'm hunting for that. I'll let you know if I can find it, hopefully before the runoff. And it's a Democrat runoff, so I'm ineligible to vote in a Democrat runoff because I ended up taking a Republican primary ballot. But this was another excellent reason why, if you were a GOP voter, you might want to take a primary ballot and vote against unqualified candidates like Omar Narvaez. In any case, can't find an address for Caitlin Logie, and maybe she owns property under another name or an LLC or something like that, or lives with a partner. I don't know, but she does not own property outright in her own name, as far as I can tell, in Dallas. So I'm not really thrilled with that. You know, again, I understand you're running for federal office, you're running for the Senate, you get into the Congress, and you just become so drunk and aroused with power that you never want to leave D.C. in the swamp. And so your home address, wherever it is, California, Massachusetts, whatever state, middle of the country, you hope to just have to spend as little time there as possible because you just decide that D.C. is your new home and you think you're going to live there forever. And it's just... It's strange to me why you would want to get into an office like this, JP. You're a fairly new lawyer. Caitlin Logie, I think she's a young woman. You haven't even lived here for a year, or just about a year. You don't have property here, and it just seems like you'd want to maybe have some investment in your community before you go for one of these positions. Or, if you're a lawyer who's worth a damn, you think you'd want to get into private practice. Although a lot of them, they're in politics and they've still got the law practice, or they at least keep their name on the door so they can collect their share of the profits and just have their law firm connected to them in their office. And let me not get off on a big tangent there, but just wanted to fill you in on what's going on this JP race. All kinds of other rumors floating around about Omar Narvaez that I don't know about. I'm not going to share them, but the bottom line is he does not belong in a JP court. He should not be presiding over cases. He is not qualified. And by his resume, or by his own admitted domicile in a lawsuit. All right, moving right along, we're going to talk about another deranged, unqualified person running for office here in Texas, James Tallarico, who told us he's thinking about the trans kids. And he's the latest great white Democrat hope in the vein of Beto O'Rourke. Texas voters, they really swung for Beto O'Rourke, didn't they? But anyway, we got James Tallarico, who just hauled in tens of millions of dollars, I believe, in his latest filing. And he defeated Jasmine Crockett in the primary on March 3rd. So we got some temporary relief. She's been pretty quiet since that primary. At least she hasn't been showing up screaming, huffing and puffing and nonsense and foolishness, lies, tricks, and shows on my social media feed nearly as much. And although I did see her, she was begging for a job. Actually, I'll pull that cut in a minute if I can find it. She was begging for a job. But here's James Tallarico. I don't even know where he appeared, but one of the accounts I follow on X just tweeted out this interview. Here he is.
I bring a limited perspective given my limited life experience. And so I have to spend a lot of my time, especially as a white, straight, cisgender male, to learn as much as I can from my colleagues and most importantly, from activists.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
President Trump? I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Well, a cisgendered, straight, white male.
Are you a homosexual?
You know what? Do you know any straight white males who use the term cisgender? Do you know anybody who uses the term cisgender? Do you even know what cisgender really means? Where did it come from? You know, that it's a red flag for me. I can tell you that when I hear somebody using the term cisgender and my limited life experience. Why are you then running for the U.S. Senate if you have limited life experience?
Nobody knows what that is.
You know, I think we have a lot of people in Texas who have a lot of life experience who would be qualified for the seat more than you. But we'll see what happens. But that's the latest with James Tallarico. Here we go. Here is Jasmine Crockett.
But I'm a whole lawyer. So I will potentially go back to practicing law. I'm engaged in conversations with some law firms about what that would look like. I want to be semi-flexible as it relates to the practice of law because I absolutely want to get to this book.
Oh, yeah, you know, speaking of a person who is housing challenged, you know, Jasmine Crockett, allegedly, she has an address in my neighborhood. I don't know. I think she claims to own a condo here. The New York Post reported late last year, I think she had a lien on the condo for not paying the HOA fee or something like that. Maybe she needs a roommate too, like Omar Narvaez. Maybe they could be roommates. They could rent a 2-bedroom. And, you know, they could pool their resources. And, you know, Jasmine Crockett, I don't think she likes to spend a whole lot of time in Texas. I think she's, again, aroused and drunk from the D.C. power. So maybe she'll be in D.C. And then Omar, he can have the place to himself in Dallas a lot of the time when Jasmine Crockett isn't there. And so that way he doesn't have to worry about commuting all the way from Denton County down to the JP court in Dallas. All right, a couple of more quick items here, 2 or 3 more quick items before I wrap it up. You know, Front Burner, D Magazine, it's a segment they've got on their website. Just usually they post a little paragraph form stories. Sometimes they've got some interesting stuff in there, but I was just perusing, and one of the writers, she posted this little blurb, counterpoint. With right-wing nonprofit Turning Point, okay, a right-wing nonprofit Turning Point, as in Charlie Kirk, formerly Charlie Kirk's TPUSA, scheduled to bring its This Is Turning Point tour to Baylor University in Waco, Texas, about 90-minute drive south of Dallas. Bringing their tour to Baylor University on April 22nd, a collection of students will be hosting an alternative event. So Turning Point, they get the description of right-wing, but those who are going to be counter-protesting, or they're going to be having an alternative event, they just get the anodyne description of a collection of students.
Ooh, girl, you got a she there.
But all about being fair and balanced, right? So that just caught my eye. I was also reading. This was in the Dallas Morning News. At Fair Park, there was a music festival. I think it was a kind of like the rave music, the DJs. What do they call it? The techno, whatever you want to call it. It's not usually my thing, but the gays are usually pretty into it. Actually, a lot of people are really into it, straight and gay alike. It's actually pretty multicultural. Middle Eastern, European, everybody's into it. So, in usually those kind of events, they sell a lot of tickets. So they had this breakaway event. It was called Breakaway Techno Dancing, whatever, at Fair Park, outdoor event. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. Ran for 2 nights, and Fair Park always in the news for being financially troubled and mismanaged and needs some TLC and neglected and all of this. And so I've been reading more recently about programming and events coming to Fair Park, badly needed. And now the residents, or some of them in East Dallas, they're complaining about the noise. So code enforcement, they're quickly going to respond to the noise from the East Dallas residents. Just how they just like how they quickly respond to all of the homeless, junkie, bum, criminal, vagrant, mental patient, ne'er-do-well, recidivist reprobates who are in every corner and pocket of the city. Just how they swiftly respond there. Now they're going to respond to the noise, and they're going to add in all of these requirements so that way to make it probably as inconvenient for the next event host as possible to be able to have an event at Fair Park, which badly needs to be having more events that bring in money that can right the ship over there. And this is going to be the last thing I talk about. Brian Hernandez, I've talked about him many times before on the Real Texas Radio podcast. If you want to go back and take a listen, I've gone into more detail. But back in June of 2022, almost 4 years ago, this 21-year-old young man with an underdeveloped brain, out of his mind, he broke into the Dallas Museum of Art, which is largely owned by the taxpayers, and the art, all of the art inside in the building, it's largely owned by the taxpayers of Dallas. He broke into the museum. He destroyed in the neighborhood of $5 million worth of priceless art. I guess that's a bit of an oxymoron. Ancient Greek pottery for the most part. And the security guards inside, the hapless, feckless security guards, they had no idea that he was in there destroying museum property, smashing open cases, smashing computers. He ended up calling the police on himself, and that's how the security inside the building were able to determine that he was there. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. It's astounding to me after the Elizabeth Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston back in 1990 was broken into, and what has now resulted in the greatest art heist of all time in terms of the value. I think 11 pieces of art were stolen, still unrecovered, and the paintings, I think they're worth like $1 billion. So it was the most valuable art heist ever in the history of the world, I guess. And the security was terrible then, back in 1990 at the museum. And it's astounding to me that how in 2022 that a 21-year-old, he literally just picked up a chair and threw it at a glass door at the Dallas Museum of Art. I think it was at like 9 or 9:30 p.m. one night, just smashed the door, and the security guards had no idea. That's how poor the security was at the Dallas Museum of Art. Now, of course, after the fact, they bring in, I think, Israeli security experts, conducted a review, instituted new practices. Again, because, it's not like there was any fairly recent historical examples. And now the Louvre was just broken into at the beginning of 2026, middle of the day. And I don't know how this happens. But anyway, Brian Hernandez, I've been keeping tabs on him ever since. He claimed he broke into the museum because he was mad at his girlfriend. That's what was widely reported. And I think he spent some time in jail. And I don't know if he bonded out. I don't know how long he was in Lou Sterrett, Dallas County Jail. But it was really just awaiting trial. It's not like he was sentenced. And so every few months I would check in to see. And so he eventually he got out. He was on, I don't know what you call it. I guess out on bond, not probation yet, but he had to check in every couple of weeks for, status update. And at least once he was busted for drug use. And I think they had him on an ankle monitor. And in any case, I knew it was coming. I did actually contact the Dallas County District Attorney, the Soros-funded DA, and just to see what was going on. And I did word it. I was like, "Look, what's happening? Are you going to dismiss the case?" That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. And they no comment. We can't comment. It's an ongoing case. Well, March 18th, just as I predicted, case dismissed. So, he's 24, 25 years old now. And I think he was self-identifying as homeless. You got to lay on the sob story real thick. And the Soros-funded DA won't have any trouble just letting you off basically scot-free. I'm not sure what kind of restitution he had to pay. But it's just like, can you imagine breaking into a museum and causing $5 million worth of destruction, ancient Greek pottery, and then a few years later, dismissed. I tweeted that out if you want to see the court documents. RTR_Bronin. There's another guy who destroyed a bunch of property outside of the Dallas Bible Museum, right across the street from North Park Mall. And that was a few months ago. I'm sure the Soros-funded DA will be promptly getting his case dismissed, maybe waiting for some of the heat to die down. I didn't see this reported anywhere about Brian Hernandez, who, by the way, speaking of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, here's a connection. Apparently he's from Boston, where the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is located. So I don't know how he made his way down to Texas. I don't think he made his way down to Texas for the same reason I made my way down to Texas, for a job. But what do I know? All right, I'm Bronin, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Real Texas Radio Podcast. Keep tuning in, keep listening, and I will catch you on the next episode.